while loneliness is quite prevalent, not all feel comfortable admitting they are lonely.
Correct.
We find it easy to say, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. But to say that I'm lonely, it's not always easy for a number of people.
Yes.
What is it that causes this loneliness? Can something be done to prevent it or to at least lessen the impact on the elderly?
Father, you have spoken about praying from the mind and praying from the heart. As we age, we spend a lot of time praying and spending time alone with ourselves. And there's a big difference when you pray from your mind and when you pray from your heart. I feel when you pray from your heart, you connect with the divine and you get answers and a lot of solutions to many things. How do we come to that level of, get down to praying from your heart and connecting with the divine?
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Aging Gracefully, a talk show for Evergreens. This is a continuation of the question that we discussed. Are you feeling lonely and unproductive? Father Juvi, you mentioned that the way to deal is to speak about it, to do something about it. But what about the family, Father? How does the family play a part in this?
I'm glad you raised that point, because this is not a battle that just this lonely person is going through alone. By nature, a family is meant to be a support system. And sometimes, even though that elderly person might not say those words, I'm lonely, when you're sensitive to a family member, be alert. Detect some of the signs that are there. Be alert. So even if they do not articulate it, they must watch. There's something that's not quite right. Why is this person so withdrawn? Why are they not communicating like before? Second is create an ambience, create an environment for them to speak. Sometimes they tell us why you're angry, why we put such pressure, they just back off. You need to say, maybe I've seen you rather out of sorts and out of color. Is there something troubling you? We create a climate rather than this rush to judgment. Yeah, you behave like that. We must. You can't force people to talk, but you can create an environment for them to feel comfortable enough to say.
Yes.
Okay. And then, most of all, listen. Listen. Listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. And if you have a problem listening as a family member, then it's you are the one who needs help. I think you are all in it together.
Yes. It's so true, Father Juvi, what you mentioned about the family. The family needs to create an environment for people who feel lonely. We hear words like loneliness, solitude. Dr. John, how would you address this?
Yeah, especially given the context of what Father Juvi said, the words we tend to hear a lot, you hear about people being alone, people feeling lonely, and of course solitude. When you look at it from a medical perspective, what do we mean when you say alone? Alone basically means that a person is physically alone on their own. Not a very good position to be in, because there are many studies which have shown that people who are alone have very bad health indicators. It's an innate need of the human being to be in communion with others, to have a social circle. And we spoke earlier in the previous episode about the need for touch and things like that. So being alone is being on your own physically, and that's one extreme end of the spectrum. Right? Loneliness, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex. And the reason I say it's complex is you can have people in a crowd who actually feel lonely. And what is the difference between being lonely and being alone, right? Being lonely is basically you feel left out, right? You feel not wanted. You feel there's a sense of disappointment in some sort. And going back to what Father Juvi mentioned, how do we cope with something like loneliness? 3 easy things to remember. One is acceptance. Right? Accept the fact that things are not the same as they used to be, and that we need to change, right? The second thing is expectations. Right? All of us have expectations in our mind. We may have expectations of ourselves as people in terms of what are the things we wish we can do, the things we used to do in the past, which we can no longer do, right? And expectations in terms of our future, right? Would our kids be there for us? Would there be someone else to help us and support us? Right? And the third thing is awareness. Being aware of the fact that things are changed. Life itself is a series of changes. And that would help us cope a lot better with loneliness, right? Another thing we see very, very often is we have seen a lot of patients, especially those who have terminal illnesses like cancers. They're not able to move around, right? They're in their beds. Very often they feel that they are a burden to others around them. And that takes me to the next stage of on the spectrum, which is solitude, right? Solitude is the most positive of these three words, right? Because put in another way, solitude is being alone by yourself and yet being very happy and comfortable with it. And that's the area, I think, where a lot of spirituality comes into place. A lot of things in terms of how we have control over our mind, how our perception of the world around us, our perception of ourselves, as well as our aspirations and expectations. And I'm sure Father Juvie will have a lot to add on this aspect.
Well, you've given me a kickstart by putting the whole medical dimension into picture and into place. That actually, he's done an excellent way of describing the way of being alone, loneliness, and solitude.
Yes.
So loneliness is often seen as a negative emotion that one feels either isolated from persons or even a mental isolation. Whereas, as he rightly put it, solitude is something that is positive, is something that you grow in.
Yes.
So while you might feel lonely in a crowd, solitude, and even in the midst of a crowd, even if you will feel a positive sense of aloneness. In fact, there's a priest, Father George Maloney, who's written a book, Alone with the Alone, an 8-day retreat. That's the thing that he calls it. But I'd like to speak a little bit about this whole dimension of solitude, because it's something that we grow into. Okay? We might start as being lonely people, but how do we allow that? And I think for that to happen, a few things, as you said rightly, we've got to examine ourselves, and that awareness, the point that you brought in. Examine the conversations we have. Sometimes by the way of being, we can be so bitter, resentful, full of rancor. We are almost like porcupines. Anybody draws near, our quills go flying at them.
Touch me not, sir.
Touch me not. And then you wonder why people do not come closer to you. You carry hurts and burdens, and I'm not trying to diminish the pain that has come from that. Please, not for a moment, because some people have suffered and suffered badly. But is this the baggage you want to carry for the rest of your life? Because the more you're going to have of that, the less are you going to grow into this kind of solitude. You know, when you hear people say this to you, I feel pain for them. I pray for them, because I'm exposed to them for merely 20 minutes. But think of these people living 24/7 inside themselves. How terribly painful for them, and therefore how lonely they live within themselves. And the struggle to let go. So, in that movement that is going to take place is, how are you able to examine the baggage that you have been carrying for so long? This does not justify the wrongdoing that has been done to you. That's the whole topic for another reflection someday. But since we are on this whole, how does one grow into solitude? The way I like to describe solitude is at the stage where you are at home with yourself. And if you are at home with yourself, you are at home anywhere in the world, wherever you are. And I think that's the grace. It's not just my effort. For us, we believe that this is what we yearn for, and God is more than willing to give us that grace. But we have to cooperate. Examine what are the toxic poisons that we have within us, and say, yes, it's time for me to let go. Because the longer I hold on to it, I'm going to be burdening myself and all those who come around me. Solitude is not just a possibility. It is a reality, because God's grace leads us into it.
One of the negative feelings that creep in is the feeling of unproductivity. Dr. John, people feel that they are a burden to the family. How would you address this?
Unfortunately, that's one of the many things we hear from a lot of people, especially the elderly. And it saddens me a lot when you have someone who's comes to you and says, now that I'm not as active as I was before and I can't do the things I used to do, I feel like I'm a burden. And this is one thing I want to tell all of you, both in the audience here and who are watching our program. Change that word burden to blessing. You are not a burden to your family or to society. You are a blessing. And the reason I say that is, if you're really honest with yourself, if you go back and look at your life, I'm sure there are going to be multiple instances where you have been blessings to people around you. And take credit for that. Own that, because you more than deserve it. And like Father Juvie just mentioned, it also talks to the point about actually accepting God's love and accepting yourself and letting yourself be loved. Right? Because very often we see elderly people in their families. For some reason, they associate their sense of self-worth, their sense of being loved, with what are they able to give to others. Simply because they've spent their whole lifetime giving. Right? And giving becomes such an intrinsic part of who they are and what they are, that the moment they feel they're not able to give, they feel they're worthless. And that's just not true. So I think you'll need to pat yourself more on the back and feel a lot better about yourself because you have contributed immensely. Then this whole term of me being unproductive. I think it's very, very important that we define the term productive.
Correct.
What do you mean when you say, I am not productive, right? I have elderly parents. And to me, the biggest blessing I have is the fact that I know that they are sitting at home praying for me. And praying for someone, I think, is something most of us are able to do, especially the Evergreens. Right? So it's very important that we understand what we say when we use certain terms. When people say that they feel they're unproductive, very often they tend to relate it in terms to what activities they have done in the past. For example, if someone has been a breadwinner, they feel, I'm no longer earning, so I'm unproductive. They fail to see or appreciate the many tangibles and intangibles. For instance, a lot of the Catholic tradition has been passed on from elderly people. Like, I feel very, very blessed that my son has his grandparents. And truth be told, I think he learns a lot about the Catholic faith, about our traditions, values, from my parents than he does from me and my wife. Similarly, there are so many activities which you all can be involved in. And that, again, I would like to use age as an indicator, because as you get older, the number of activities which you can do both physically and externally tend to go down. It was so lovely that the audience we had last time, we had a couple who came to me after the shooting and they said, John, we need your help because we are trying to get young couples together. They're involved in marital counseling and organizing workshops. And I thought to myself, it's so lovely that these Evergreens are trying to rekindle romance in Catholic couples and families. And what a wonderful contribution that is. Similarly, there are so many different areas in which you can help, either in terms of the advice. And one huge thing which we see happening around us, the present generation, is the lack of wise counsel. You, with your experience, are in a very unique position to guide youngsters. Similarly, the roles you all play as volunteers, either in society, within the church, within your families. So I think at the end of the day, the more we think about it, I think it's a matter of our mindset. Why is it that we are letting ourselves feel that we are unproductive? Why is it that we feel that we are a burden? Of course, I understand we have a lot of patients who are sometimes bedridden and cannot do much on their own. And it's very natural because they come from a place of love, right? They've always given to their families. They've been there to take care of their families. And when they see their families sacrificing so much to try and take care of them, they feel that they are a burden to their families. And I want to reinforce this point because I think it's very, very important. Your family loves you, right? There may be the odd situation where people may whine about having to take care about elderly people, especially those who are in bed. But even then, I think you have to remember that you have been a blessing to others. And whenever you talk about what you can give, remember there is still a lot that you can contribute. Whether it's through your prayers, whether it's through your time, the very fact that you're there. I still remember one of my colleagues, she was around 65 years old, and she had a mum who was blind and eventually passed on at the age of 96. And when we went to visit her at home for the funeral, she was sobbing. And she said, Doc, I know my mum was blind. I know that she couldn't do much for us. She used to lie in bed all day. But I had my mom. And just her presence in the room next to us made such a big difference. So I want all of you to understand and accept the fact that you are still very, very valuable and you are still precious. And God still has a reason why you're still on earth with all of us.
Wow.
Yeah, very good.
All I can say is amen and hallelujah to that. Yeah, it's really... This whole aspect about, is best expressed that you do what you can at this stage of your life. When I was based in Rome, we had Father Enrique Lopez from Paraguay, where football is almost a religion in that place because they're so passionate about it. And he would describe the 3 stages in that life. He says, in the first stage, you're one actively playing football. The second stage is when you move, you're the coach. You guide and the third is when you're just sitting on the sofa and say, pass the ball, kick it over there. So sometimes life is like that. We do what we can at the different stages. But I think what you particularly opened vistas and avenues that people can continue to contribute. When we were studying philosophy, one of the phrases from René Descartes, the French philosopher, was cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Now you can translate those axioms into others. I work, therefore I am. So if I stop working, I'm nobody. Or I earn, therefore I am. So if I don't earn, I'm not productive. And I think as you so well got them away from that mindset, that you are productive only if you put something on the table. No, there's so much you do. As you explain, your grandparents are not just babysitting. They're communicating traditions. They're passing on the faith. They're telling Bible stories. And I'm sure so many of the elderly who have this wonderful grace, not just babysitting, but really doing something so beautiful. So it's looking at your activities also through these wonderful eyes. Basically, what you have a passion for. I was once speaking to a group of people in Europe, and I said to them, it was winter time. Just because there is snow on the roof, that doesn't mean there's no fire in the hearth or in the heart. What's your passion? Enkindle it within yourself and within others as well. That's a great way to be productive.
Father Juvi spoke about a very important point, following your passion. And it's very important that whatever you all decide to get involved in, do something that you're really excited about and that you love doing. It's very interesting to see how society itself is evolving today. We live in a very utilitarian society where people are valued depending on what they bring to the table, what they have to contribute. And it gets easy sometimes for us to get lost in that mindset, which is why many people tend to give value to themselves based on what they can contribute, which is where we go back to the previous point I mentioned. Very important for us to change our mindsets. You'll have contributed as much as you could when you could in your good years. There is still a lot which you can contribute during your present years. You don't have to always be a giver. It's okay to receive.
Dr. John, it was a very profound thought when you said that the elderly are a blessing rather than a burden, and that it's okay to receive rather than to give. And we go to another topic about planning. Most of our life is planned by either our parents or by us. But do we plan old age? So I think God wants us to experience old age, and He wants us to make the best of it. So how do the elderly plan their old age? What are your thoughts about it, Dr. John?
I think being old enough to experience the twilight of your life is itself a blessing from God.
Yes.
Right? And like you rightly mentioned, most of our life tends to be planned either by others or by ourselves. And as the saying goes, if you don't plan yourself, someone else will plan for you, and you may not really like it.
Yes.
Right? So it's very important that when you talk about planning for old age, you need to start at a younger age. And this is targeted to a lot of the younger audience as well who are watching this program. It helps if you start early. Right? And one of the reasons why we hesitate to plan is fear. Right? We tend to fear what we do not know. And there's a lot of skepticism and uncertainty about the future. The very fact that when people talk about growing old, there's a lot of negative thoughts associated with it. Thoughts related to being disabled, having to be dependent on others. And like we mentioned in the previous episode, the good news is that life expectancy has gone up. And a lot of us, with God's grace, can expect to live a lot longer and have better quality and quantity of life than the previous generations. How do we go about doing this? And what I'd like to do is I'd like to break up this planning process into 3 components. Yeah, one is planning which is done by the individual or the Evergreens, planning in terms of how it affects the family, and thirdly, planning in terms of the community or society. Because one very unique thing associated with the planning, especially for aging, is unlike when you do stuff related to career planning or family planning, when it comes to planning your elderly phase of your life, you don't have much control over it.
Yes, correct.
You know, it may be your plan, but in terms of implementation, as you get older, you start losing control over your plan.
Correct.
Right? And that brings us to the point which Father Juvie mentioned, no? From independence to interdependence. And that transition is not always smooth. Right? So what are some of the few easy, basic, low-hanging fruit things which we can do in terms of planning for aging? One is taking care of your health. I know that a huge percentage of the population is affected by chronic diseases. And I'm talking about diseases like hypertension, diabetes, heart-related issues. And the surprising and sad thing which we observe as medical practitioners is that many of us take these diseases very lightly. Can we change our lifestyles? We know that we've got to exercise better, we've got to eat better, we've got to take our medications better, but somehow there's this hesitancy to do that. A simple act of changing your lifestyle, switching your diet to something which is a lot more healthy, will increase your lifespan as well as the quality of your life. Right? Secondly, have you thought about medical insurance? The general rule of thumb is the younger you are when you sign up for medical insurance, the less your premium is, the less your costs are. Right? And the current trend in healthcare shows that the cost of treatment of medical conditions, surgical conditions, is going through the roof. So it's always a good idea for you to plan about medical insurance, how you want to do your payments, how you want to do your payouts. Secondly, in terms of better health, studies have been done which shown that people who have a wider social circle, who tend to interact more with others, tend to live healthier lives and tend to live longer. Right? Do you have a social group which you want to be part of? Do you have certain hobbies which you like to pursue? Would you be able to actually identify people you could hang out with? It could be people either in your apartment complexes, the neighborhoods you live in, or the church, or any other social circle, because that's going to make a huge difference to your lifestyle and your quality of life. The problem is we very often get so busy doing our day-to-day mundane activities that we don't take time to think and plan for the future. And these are all pleasant activities which you'll be happy to be part of. Right? Thirdly, how many of you have actually planned on what they call estate planning? Have you thought of writing your will? Have you spoken to an expert in this regard? Very often parents tend to put that away because that can give rise to very unpleasant conversations. How do you divide your property among your children? Would there be differences among them and between them because of the decisions you take? And human nature is such that we like to postpone things which we feel are not pleasant. But that's something you need to think about a lot more seriously. Similarly, what are your priorities? All your life you have spent serving others, doing things for your children, saving for them, taking loans for their education. And this is a very uniquely Asian phenomenon. Now, where most of the Asians and Indians who graduate don't have any student loans. That's because the parents have either taken the loans themselves or have spent all they had to ensure that the child gets an education. Right? Have you thought about spending on yourself? And that's one thing which surprises me. When I travel to Europe and the US, I see the elderly, the Evergreens, going out for trips, camping out, spending so much on themselves. We rarely get to see that. Yes. It can be a simple thing as deciding to go on a pilgrimage, for instance, or go to the Holy Land. We talk to so many Evergreens and they say, I wish I could go and travel. I wish I could have gone to the Holy Land. But they never did because they always said, this money which I have, let me save it for a rainy day. Right? Why don't you all think of that a little differently? Can I spend some of the money I have earned, which I worked so hard for, which I have saved, and use it for something which I like doing? It can be anything, right? Then, of course, you have thoughts associated with what happens when I become so frail that I become dependent on someone. Right? Now, we spoke about being alone. And one of the big challenges which we are seeing a lot in Evergreens is they want to be on their own. Because somewhere along the line, this whole feeling of being independent is associated with managing things on your own, doing things yourself. But guess what? That works only to a certain extent. Right? Do we have the awareness that, after some time, we may not be able to do, in fact, I would say we will not be able to do all our activities of daily living on our own. Right? We are going to be dependent on others. And we need to plan for that. Because one, there may be costs associated with it. Two, and more importantly, it's important for us to prepare our minds to accept the fact that we may have to be dependent on others. Now, there's a lot of talk, and we may touch upon this in another episode, about senior citizens living quarters or communities which people tend to be part of, especially parents who have kids working abroad, kids working in different cities, not geographically in the same place, and for various reasons. Right? It's important for us because though many of us have been brought up in families, initially we had a joint family, then we have nuclear families, and we had families where the elderly are always taken care of by their children. But the fact of the matter is, there are societal constraints as we move forward. So that may also change in the future. And that needs to be factored in when we do our planning for our old age. Right? So in addition to that, I think the family plays a very, very important role. Firstly, do we feel free enough to have these open conversations that as I age, these are some of the problems I see myself having, especially spouses. These are issues which need to be sorted out. In a city like Bangalore, just last week, I was talking to an elderly couple. They own quite a bit of property around the city, but they're scared to sort out the documents related to the property because the kids are going to ask for their share. Now, unfortunately, a lot of children have also gotten into this mindset where there is a certain amount of dependency on the parent, right? They don't like it when the parents spend on themselves. They feel that why are they wasting money? It can be used for something better. Right? It's important to have these conversations because as you get older, it's important that the family knows what plans you have for yourself. The family knows what you feel about being put on a ventilator or some form of assisted help when your health goes down. And those all can be very touchy, very sensitive, very controversial topics. And there's a very, very clear line which the Catholic Church also takes in that regard, and that I'm sure we will touch upon in some other episode in the future. But it's very important that even though these topics tend to be sensitive, tend to be uncomfortable, we need to have these topics, we need to have these conversations with our family members. Because at the end of the day, you'll have to plan things out in such a way that, one, what you want happens to as much of an extent as possible. Two, your family also knows what you want from your life. Right? And there will come a stage where you may not be able to do things on your own. At least if they are aware of what is it you wanted, they will be in a position to help you out with it. And thirdly, to a lesser extent, I think it's community and society. Because I think we have a very biased outlook when it comes to evergreens and the elderly. There are certain expectations which society tends to have and project onto others. I've met a lot of youngsters who are struggling to make a career for themselves. And they're held back because of the so-called societal pressure when it comes to expectations of the children having to take care of their parents. Wherever possible, I'm a big believer that wherever possible, it's wonderful if kids can take care of the parents, be with them. But there are situations which are very real where that's not possible. So even society as such needs to take a look and see, for example, one of the saddest things that has happened in the present government is that a lot of benefits which are meant for senior citizens have been taken away. Simple things like your discounts on your railway tickets, simple benefits associated with pensions have been taken away. Why? Because it's a very small voting population. The votes really don't matter when you look at the absolute numbers. But society has been quiet. Why is it that no one really stood up and spoke for the senior citizens? Because in a sense, as people get older, their voices become feebler, both literally and figuratively, and there's no voice for them. So I think what is very, very important is that we begin this process of planning for the later years. It is a scary thought. It is a scary process, but it's something which needs to be done. And again, I would like to re-emphasize the fact that it's okay to take care of yourself. It's okay to think about yourself. It's okay to provide for yourself, right? Because you deserve it.
Thanks, Dr. John. That was really enriching from a number of different perspectives. It was practical. It was pragmatic. It's really, and I'm sure there's so many points that we can take from that. I'd like to probably take us back to, you gave us the building blocks. Let me take you to the ABCDs. What do I mean by that? Attitudes, behavior, closure, and death, preparation for it. So very quickly, this is my take on it.
Dr. John, you said that older people should go ahead with activities that they love. So which are the areas where you think they would be welcome? And more importantly, what should be the attitude of the older people as they go into areas, maybe areas that they once dominated and now has been taken over by a younger set of people? So what should be your attitude of the older people?
Right now, my issue is that I spent all my younger years worrying about the future, about the children, about all the duties I had to perform, and I have lost out on the time I should have served other people. Like in the Bible, they say, if you have fed someone, you fed me, Jesus said. I have not done all of it. And now I feel that time is running out. I don't have enough time to fulfill those requirements, and it's troubling me. So I want you to address that. What can I do now in the few years that left?
Please like and share this video with your friends and family. We value your feedback and comments below. So until next time, it's goodbye from all of us here at Aging Gracefully, a talk show for Evergreens.